So I think I should start with the immortal words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. So, oh, there it is. I haven't done a PowerPoint in a while. This is really, really basic. I didn't have a lot of time. So how many people have heard of tiny houses? Okay, it qualifies now as a movement. How many people have an image in your head of what a tiny house is? Okay, we're not going to take the time to do this, but I'm willing to bet that you have different images, that everybody's got different ideas about what this is, because there's such a wealth of creativity and different approaches going on in this movement. It's really extraordinary. How many people have ever lived in a really small space for more than a week? Okay, all right. And how many people have ever felt oppressed by your stuff? Okay, good. All right. So this should work out pretty well. So since 2012, I have been regularly going down what I've come to refer to as the tiny house rabbit hole. And that sometimes, oh, they're already applauding. That sometimes takes the shape of a lost couple of hours on the web, where I someone sends me a message and there's a link in it, and I go to that link, and then 3 hours later, I sort of realize, what have I been doing? I've been following from link to link and picture to picture, so on and so forth. So I invite you, if you're interested in this topic, what do I do? That one? Right there? Okay. So this is really personal. This is about what I've done. Everybody's journey is different as far as I can tell. So these are my reasons for going tiny. Financial and housing security. A way to have a place to live that suits you, that you can afford, and that protects you from the uncertainties that may lie ahead. Simplifying my relationship with my stuff, with stuff in general. Just really paring it down. Reducing my personal footprint. Climate change is a kind of overwhelming topic that we hear about almost on a daily basis. And I think lots of times it's easy to feel like there's nothing you personally can do to make any kind of impact. This is something I can do, is to make my footprint, my personal environmental footprint, considerably smaller than it has been in the past, and even that it is right now. Mobility. I'm planning to create a tiny house that's on a trailer so it can be moved. I don't really think about traveling in it. Some people have done that. People have built houses that they can actually just pick up and go whenever they feel like it. From what I've read, that's pretty challenging. But I'd like the option to change my perspective from time to time. Whether that's just something as simple as living in town during the winter, when I value the sociability of being close to people and the convenience and so on and so forth, and then living out of town in the summer, in the country, away from things. Or it might mean picking up and moving to the Southwest for a year to see what that's like. Freedom is a kind of hard thing to define. I think it's really personal in this context. But what I envision is the opportunity to focus on what really matters and not spend all my time trying to make a living, to pay the bills, to keep the wolves away from the door, and survive. And then I added one more bullet in my head that's not up there, which is community. And that's because this movement has become a community. I mean, it's like everywhere I go, if I mention the fact that I'm thinking about building a tiny house, it's like people want to know, or they're already doing it, or they know someone who's doing it, or whatever. So it really is a movement. It is growing. I just got an email message the other day from one of the leaders in the movement that there's, and I can't even remember what it's called, it had initials on it, but it was some kind of international body that decides what qualifies as a house. And there's a petition underway that's apparently gaining strength, and they've got people who are going to be at this meeting, and they've got a chance on the agenda, and so on and so forth, to get tiny houses qualified as official houses, which has tremendous implications because right now this movement is kind of operating under the radar in many, many ways. There are some places like Portland, Oregon that have really embraced it and are seeing it as a solution to all kinds of housing issues, whether it's housing for young people, housing on college campuses, housing for the homeless, housing for the elderly. And in my own town, I live in Montpelier, and in the last year or so, as I walk around town, I keep looking at little plots of land and thinking, tiny house there, there, there. Because Montpelier doesn't have much place to build. We're stuck between three rivers, we've got hills in every direction, and all of the proposals that have been put forth to build housing and so on and so forth have been met with all kinds of controversy. And I think tiny houses could represent a terrific infill housing opportunity for many locations. So my journey, I'm going to talk really just about what I've been doing most recently. Get this to go. So just a few weeks ago, at the beginning of September, there was the first, probably annual, because it was really popular, Tiny House Festival down in Brattleboro. And it was organized by a few people who came at it from a couple different directions. One was from a housing perspective, one was from a personal perspective, and one was from a design perspective. And they brought together a whole bunch of people with a lot of expertise, and they had a series of talks. They had a whole bunch of examples of tiny houses on display that people could crawl all over and ask questions about. And then the best part, from my perspective, was the next day, they had a tour of 6 tiny houses that people were actually living in the immediate vicinity of Brattleboro and sort of the Putney, Rockingham area. And so we got, those who went on the tour, we got to go visit these tiny houses and talk to the people who had built them and were living in them. So I'm just going to show you a few. Let me get out of the way so that you guys can see. Is that okay? You see? So this is what I call colonial tiny. Now it's a little hard to tell the scale here because it's in the woods, but it's small. It's really small. And I have to tell you that when I talked to the guy who built it, that front door there with the windows on the side, he built the entire house around that door. He found that door, loved that door, and all the rest of the dimensions, everything else was designed. And the other thing that's cool about this place, it was built almost entirely from found materials. He scoured recycling places and architectural surplus and all that sort of stuff and did all the work himself. He doesn't live in it full time. It's a getaway place for him. He lives in a small apartment in Brattleboro and goes up here in the woods to get away. But he sees it as a possible place to retire to. This I call the DIY tiny because a lot of people have done this. They just decided to build one. They didn't have any experience. They had no knowledge. In some cases, they had some skills in that they'd built things before, so they knew which end of the hammer to hold and how to make the saw work and stuff like that. And this was a young couple who built this and actually traveled to several different places and lived in it for periods of time, and then settled in Vermont and started having kids and a family and so on and so forth. So now this is a guest house, and they live in a bigger house, which is the story I've heard a lot from younger people who choose to live in a tiny house. It's a great solution for a period of time. And so this is the interior of that little house. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. They got a lot of stuff given to them that they have in this house. And the guy I talked to, he said, yeah, we probably wouldn't have kept that stove because it takes up too much room. And the wood stove, and this was a big reset for me in my plans, because I thought, oh, great, tiny little wood stove, cozy and comfortable and stuff. They were given that wood stove. It's way too big for that tiny house. They spent most of the winter with the windows open. And I talked to some other people for whom that was the same situation, which is, this is a very small space. You put a few people in it and it's warm enough to live in. Especially the ones that are built with really high insulation value and air circulation and so on and so forth. This is the designer tiny. This was one that this woman, she hired professional builders to build it, but she designed it herself in that she had those skills and she knew exactly what she wanted. And I'm sorry this picture's a little blurry. But, so this house is about 20 feet long, 8.5 feet wide, which is what you have to have if you're going to tow it over the road without having to get a special permit. So there's certain restrictions on the size. But this is the inside looking toward her kitchen at one end, and she chose to have the full height of the ceiling at that end of the house, so that when you walked in that door, that orange door, you immediately had this huge sense of space. And then this is the other side, the other end, and that stuff at the top there, that's a loft. That's a sleeping loft. And she's got a desk, office space under there. The bathroom is in the back, and there's a washing machine. All in 20 by 8.5 feet. This is my favorite, because this is close to where I'm headed. This is a repurposed trolley that originally ran the streets in a town in Illinois. It's called the Vidalia, like the onion. And it ended up in Vermont, and nobody's quite sure how it ended up in Vermont, but the folks who now own it found it in Vermont, bought it for $2,000, and are busily refurbishing it. And they're insulating it and putting in a new floor, but it has wonderful woodwork and things like that in it. The bedroom has actually taken the place of where the driving part and the engine and everything were. But what I love about this, and you can see it on the outside here, is see that thing at the top that's along the top? I just recently learned that's called a mollycroft. And it's a design feature of things like this and also gypsy wagons. It's a way of bringing more light into the space without taking up wall space to put more windows in and losing heat and all of that sort of thing. So that's the trolley tiny. And here's where I'm headed. I took a workshop earlier this year with a wonderful guy named Greg Ryan, who some of you may know. He's a musician in addition to doing many, many other things. And he designed and built this for some people that he knows. This was a very high-end project. That little wagon, which is 12 feet long by 6.5 feet wide, costs $60,000. But it has all sorts of features. It's fully mobile, it has solar, it has really high-quality materials and things like that. The people who were building it had very specific ideas. But I decided really early on, after reading a book by one of the women who was one of the pioneers in this movement, that I didn't want a loft. Because one of the things that happened to her early in her residence in her very tiny house was she fell off the ladder from her loft, broke her coccyx bone, and spent the next 3 months sleeping on her little 2.5 foot wide narrow bench seating that was on the ground floor. And that was enough to persuade me, combined with the fact that I'm going to be 65 next year, not to want a loft. So that's where this idea of everything on one level and the whole sort of traditional gypsy wagon started to capture my imagination. And I want to stop here for a second, and this was a slide I should have added, but I thought of it later, so I went to old school poster board. Yes, sorry. So these are some things I've learned. Okay? Everything takes longer than you think. From looking at things on the web when you thought you've only been on the web for half an hour and it turned out to be 3. To building, to designing, to all those things. Our relationship with our stuff is really complicated. As I have started to go through the process of downsizing and getting rid of things, initially it was pretty easy. You know, some of the stuff that's really easy to get rid of, and it's like a great relief. It's like, got that out of here. And then you get down to the stuff that's a little more emotionally connected, a little more embedded in your life, and you have to start asking yourself really hard questions about, why do I have this? Why is this still in my life? And I've moved a lot. And when I look at some of the things that I have dragged from state to state across the country with me, I'm just astounded. And one of the things I discovered is that for me, some things are mnemonic devices in that they are my link to a specific point in time or a particular experience or another person. And it's not that I've forgotten all those things, it's just that I don't always think about them. But if I see that thing, or look at that book, or something like that, then I remember. And so I have to ask myself really hard, will I not remember anymore if I shed this particular, thing? And then need is different than want. Has everybody had that experience of deciding, do I really need this, or do I really want this? And that's something that goes on a lot as you go through the process of downsizing, and also as you make choices in designing a tiny house, because the great thing about a tiny house, it's like a glove. It's going to fit you perfectly, because you're going to get to choose exactly what you want it to be. If you only want to reach this far to pick something up in your kitchen, you can make it work that way. And the last thing is you're going to change your mind multiple times. So it's really important to maintain flexibility as you go through this. And then the last couple things I'll show you is a couple more pictures of the gypsy wagon. That's the interior. And again, this is only 6.5 feet wide by 12 feet long. And it's on an aluminum trailer, so it's relatively light and can be towed by a standard pickup, sort of big size pickup truck. That's the back. The guy who designed this, every single one of those windows was custom made, including the hardware. So these are questions I'm still pondering. How much do I really need? Not just in terms of stuff, but also in terms of this space that I'm going to live in. What do I need? What's important to me? What does that look like? And I'm getting to the point, a couple weeks ago I bought myself a big drawing pad and some really good pencils and a big eraser. And I'm starting to play around. How much is it going to cost? I have a very specific and limited budget. And so I'm working within that budget, and that's driving many things. Where's it going to be? When is it going to be? I've been at this for 4 years already. Who? This is a really important thing. This I learned from the recent workshop I took. Because I'm not a builder, I don't have all these skills, I don't have all those tools, I have to find someone I can partner with. And hopefully that will be a reasonable arrangement involving money, but also involving compatibility, that we can be on the same wavelength in terms of what I need the help on and what that's going to accomplish for me. And then how? How are we going to do it? That's going to be the big adventure. How's it all going to come together? So I have resources with me. I have some books. Come find me at dinner if you have questions. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm happy to help you. Thanks very much.